times right before people pass, they get that sudden burst of energy, and they return usually to their profession. My dad was an airline pilot, and the last thing he did was hooked his belt up in the cockpit. It was incredible to watch. And then he passed away. And that's what General Jackson does. He rears up out of that bed and starts acting like a general again, barking out orders and giving commands. And then she said his body would just slowly relax, put his head back on the pillow. Quote, a soft, serene smile came over his face. And at 3:15 p.m., by that very clock in there that was brought in by Mrs. Chandler to make it a more homey atmosphere, he said, let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees. With that, the great general was gone. Mrs. Jackson will stay with him about 2 to 3 hours. Then she'll come out and she'll ask Jim Lewis to go in and wash the body and prepare the body to go to Richmond. And then she will come by Jim Lewis and she'll say, Jim, I'd like you to promise me that you will be sure and stay with him until he's safely buried in Lexington. She's worried with this war going on, somebody might bother her husband's body. She also will ask a request. I want things to go quickly, don't drag it out, it's too hard on me. And so they will honor all of her wishes. Now she will go to the main house. Jim Lewis will dress the body in civilian clothing. There was no more uniform after that shooting. And what's the first thing when we're hurt or go to an emergency room? People rip off your clothes to see where you're hurt, and that's what they'll do to the general. So they'll dress him in civilian clothes. They'll take him over to the main house where that night he'll lay in state, if you will, in the parlor. Mrs. Jackson thanking everybody. She came down and spent the night with him by his side, and she said he looked so very peaceful. And she thanked people for helping him look like that and for the help they had given her. Now the next morning she is told 2 hours to Richmond, not very far, Mrs. Jackson, don't worry, we'll get you there quickly. He'll lay in state for 2 days, and then we'll take him down to Lexington and bury him per his request. They'll open the doors of the plantation, and down there along the train tracks on either side, the Southern people will be lined up because they'll know their Confederate general has passed away. And they don't know how to show their respect and their sorrow, but it's May in Virginia. We have beautiful wildflowers. They'll pick the flowers and they'll present them to Mrs. Jackson. She in turn, and this is scary to me as a mother and grandmother, I wouldn't do it. She passes that baby out through the train window for the well-wishers to hold, to say they had held General Jackson's daughter, and then pass the baby back to the mother. It takes 12 hours to get to Richmond. Mrs. Jackson is exhausted and asked to be removed from the train before that last stop where she knows there will be more people wishing them well and paying their respects. So he'll lay in state per his request for 2 days and then on to Lexington, where he's buried next to his first wife and the child they lost. And when he married Mariana, his wife that was with him here, she was his second wife. They lost a child at the age of about 4 to 5 weeks old. So the baby that's here is his third child, but only surviving child. Her name is Julia. She's 5 months old. Her mother will raise her, and then they'll get to those turbulent teen years that are no different back then than they are today. The daughter and mother will have a bit of a disagreement. The daughter will go to California, marry, and have 2 children. Then she'll say she missed her mother. I think she wanted a babysitter. But she comes back to North Carolina. She reconciles with her mother just in time to get typhoid fever and die. And then Mrs. Jackson will raise those 2 grandchildren as her own. The granddaughter died in 1991 in Los Angeles, California, in a nursing home at the age of 104. So if you don't shoot this family, they have a pretty good longevity in here. Now, it'll fall to General Robert E. Lee as commanding general to issue General Orders number 61. Google them, folks. They've been recently found within the last 3 years in Lee's hand. And it's his orders to the men. Regret to inform you, Thomas Jonathan Jack. Very cut and dry, very military. The next day, General Lee will write a letter to his son. And now we're talking a family letter, a father-to-son letter, and no military. It's an easy letter to remember. It's one sentence. Dear son, I simply don't know how to replace him. Robert E. Lee, Commanding General, Army of Northern Virginia. So again in this room, the bed he died in, it's an old colonial rope bed. The folded blanket at the foot of the bed was used on the general, again, an attempt by Mrs. Chandler to make her storage area a homey atmosphere for the general. And if I hush up and let you listen to the clock, well, you'll have something in common with General Jackson, because those would be the last sounds he would hear in his lifetime. So I'll be right in there. We've got some free brochures for you. Please walk around. You may go upstairs, take pictures with flash, no restrictions. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to help you.
Thank you.
I've had two people mention that, and I don't know when they were doing that.
Resistance batteries.
They're from Arlington House at Arlington National Cemetery, so yes, they are. Get this, in fact, it's been here a long time. Well, when she got elderly, she knew they never married any of the daughters.